At rrcats.com, we have everything that you need to sell your catalytic converters. We have an easy quoting system that you can send pictures or serial numbers to. We have the ability to get your cats graded within 1 business day. You'll get quick payment via PayPal or check. If you look at our Google reviews and our other online reviews, you will feel confident with the team at rrcats.com to be able to purchase your catalytic converter time and time again. We look forward to earning your business at rrcats.com today.
Hi Scrappers, Tom from the iScrap app, and today is Wednesday, April 14th, 2021. Thank you very much for tuning in. Whether you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook, we're happy that you're joining us. We would love to hear questions, so if you have those questions for us, even if they're just comments on things that we're talking about, by all means feel free to post those comments, ask the questions. If we can get to them during the Facebook Live, during our live sessions, we'll answer them. If we don't get to them during live, never fear, we'll make sure to get those answers to you after, or we'll get them to you over the next few days if another scrapper doesn't reach out and get you those answers before we do. Now, do not forget, our podcast, Scrap You Later, is out with stories from the scrap metal world, talking about the history and pricing of copper, history of the iScrap app. In the coming weeks, we're going to have different stories coming out, different ways for you to learn about the scrap metal market in ways that you never thought would have existed, and we're really excited for the podcast to be out. So wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure you look for Scrap You Later. If you don't listen to podcasts, what a perfect way to introduce you into the podcasting world. Now let's talk about scrap, because that's why we're here. Over the last week, we have been watching these markets, and today, boy, what a really nice surprise. I woke up this morning around 4 o'clock and the markets were up 1 or 2 cents per pound. Well, right now we have a 9-cent per pound increase on the copper side of things. And of course, that's going to make me smile, and it should make you smile as well. But the thing that I've really been smiling about is that copper has held steady over the last month. Yeah, there's been some 9-cent increases or 7-cent decreases, but overall, we have had copper in this little 2 to 3% window where it's going up or down the same amount per pound. These are really good pieces of news. These are positive signs that the market is not only stabilizing, but really starting to recreate the bottom for itself moving forward. Now, one thing that we've been watching really closely is that little word that starts with the letter I. Can you guess it? No? Okay. The word inflation is one word that we're really watching for. Now, most economists are telling us that inflation is, naturally occurring, and of course it's going to exist, and the government is trying to assure us that we're not going to have a massive amount of inflation. But what we are looking for is beginning signs, and that generally comes from the commodity field. When we start to see oil prices, aluminum, rice, copper, wheat, cows, poultry, when we start to see those commodities increasing in price, that generally is the telltale signs that inflation is on the way. Now, of course, you're going to say, Tom, why should we care about inflation when we're talking about copper? Well, the inflationary period could cause copper prices to remain at the levels that they're at now and possibly forever. So for years, we've been hearing people complain about the markets not going back to that $4 per pound number that we saw about 10 years ago. But here we are in the midst of what could be a resurgence and almost another renaissance for copper, with the world seemingly getting ready to explode with some type of economic growth after everyone was locked in their homes for a year plus. So we're watching these copper markets and saying to ourselves, having copper stabilize around a trading level of $4 per pound is really a great sign, because what we're going to see moving forward is more stability in the market. Watching these markets stabilize, watching these markets really gain ground underneath them is going to allow scrapyards to get a little more aggressive with their pricing. It's going to allow scrapyards to be able to push these higher prices to you, because they're going to have more assurances from the people that they sell to, whether it's overseas traders or domestic mills. So these are all really positive pieces of news. On top of that, add all of the big growth that we see going on. We could talk about the semiconductor shortage. We could talk about cars flying off of car lots right now. There's a lot of things that involve metals and involve commodities overall that we're really paying attention to as we pull ourselves out of this recessionary period that we've experienced due to COVID and bring ourselves back into a regular market, one that could now be buoyed by $6 trillion that was freshly injected into the markets. And a lot of people have asked us, hey, Tom, what are all of those different plans, those stimulus plans, going to do to affect the copper market, to affect the metals market? And while people might not be sitting in their houses taking their $1,400 checks and buying some copper, what they are going to be doing is buying goods. They're also going to be buying services. Now, services might not be directly tied to commodities, but if people are going to be buying more services, those service people are going to need new tools. They're going to need more infrastructure for all the different networking and things that they're working on. But if people are buying things, they could be buying TVs and cars and iPhones and iPads and electronics and other things that contain metal. So if you have bought anything in the last few months that contains metal in it, you're helping this commodity resurgence really push itself forward, and we could see those copper prices not only continuing to be where they are now, but also moving forward, having more of an upward trajectory. Now, we have had a couple of questions asked to us over the last week, and we want to make sure that we address those questions and we get those answers to us. So we're going to start with one of the questions that we had recently. We're going to answer it, and then if you have any questions from there, let us know.
Sure. So on YouTube, we had a comment, I have an old dehumidifier I would like to get the copper from. Where can I take it to get the refrigerant recovered?
Sure. So refrigerant is always such a really interesting and funny topic to walk around. There is one company called USA Refrigerants, as we give them a free plug here, that has multiple national locations to be able to have Freon drained from. Whether it's air conditioners, dehumidifiers, refrigerators, things that cool things down, those will have refrigerant in them. And they could have a variety of different types, but it's always good to work with one of these nationally acclaimed, and if it's a local guy, you want to make sure that they have all their certifications when you go to scrap these things out. Now, just an FYI, dehumidifiers don't have much copper in them, so these refrigerant recovery people, they could charge you per appliance, per device to drain those as a service, because the amount of gas that they're pumping out might not be worth enough money to A, cover their overhead, and B, allow them to make more profit. So hopefully that answers your question. Looks like we had another question from last week that we'd like to answer now.
What would be your recommendation to avoid mixed loads at scrapyards and losing money on them, like mixing chrome plated brass with aluminum?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. And when I read it yesterday, preparing for our live session today, I kind of had to sit down and read it twice. Now, it sounded during the question that the scrapper was asking from a very bad experience that he or she was having at a scrapyard, saying that the scrapyard didn't know what they were doing, didn't know how to separate and sort materials correctly, and that they were essentially screwing the customer at the scale because the materials that they were selling were not correct. Now listen, everyone is going to make mistakes, especially scrapyards, because they're getting so many different materials in every day. Take, for instance, at my scrapyard, Rockaway Recycling, yesterday, we had a 104-pound transaction for what we call ballasts, but the customer called transformers. Now, there was just a little miscommunication, but what was nice about it was we were able to explain to the customer how we called the ballasts versus the transformers. We were able to teach them, but they were able to teach us that they didn't understand our online classifications, and it was a little confusing to them. We ended up crediting the customer for the full amount of money that they anticipated getting. $14.15 extra cents were sent to them in a check. But what was important to us was that they voiced their concern in a constructive way. And what we have found, not only as a scrapyard owner, but talking to scrappers and scrap yards across the country, is that when you're able to clearly articulate your concerns, when you're able to tell them your problems in a way that makes them want to earn your business more, that's when you know you have a solid relationship. You have a good relationship with the scrapyard. You could also learn with the scale manager, and that helps you make more money and establish more of a rapport with your local yard. But it looks like we have another question coming in.
Sam asked, is red brass and bronze the same thing?
Red brass and bronze are the same thing, Sam, and that's a great question. Generally, bronze or red brass, also known as composition, is between 80 and 90% copper based. Now, how would you know that by looking at it without having an XRF analyzer? That's also a great question that I'd like to follow up with. You will be able to look at a regular yellow brass piece. Take whatever take a bed frame for instance, or if you look at brass and you can see that yellow shine is on it. Well, by taking a file, and we've documented this before, and we'll make sure to either link to the different videos or link to the different articles we've written, by taking a file and filing your yellow brass, and then comparing it to something that you think is red brass or bronze, you'll be able to see that color difference. And if I had it here, it literally is red versus yellow, and that allows you to really know what you have ahead of time. Now, let's say you're colorblind. Let's say you're still confused. Well, separate what you think could be bronze. So when you get to the scrapyard, you might either want to call in advance to see if they have an XRF analyzer, number one, and if they do, if it would be available for you to be able to sample your material so you can learn what you have, and in the future, separate your materials a little easier. Sam, we hope that answers the question for you. Another follow-up.
So Andrew asked, I have a question about copper.
Okay.
Would tinned copper go as number 2 copper, or would it have a lower price than number 2 copper?
Awesome question, Andrew. Tinned copper will go as a number 2 copper, and when you have a lot of it, as long as it is not lead coated, believe it or not, it will go higher. So it could be a little better than a number 2, kind of between a number 1 and a number 2 price, but do not expect a large increase, especially if you have less than 5,000 pounds of material. Now, over the last week, we've been watching oil prices, which have been rising. We've been watching gasoline prices, which have been rising. And we've been watching the different steel prices, which have not been rising, which have had about a $7 to $10 per ton decrease. Now, these steel prices going down is not a huge concern to us, as we're watching the markets and saying the strength is there. But one of the problems is that steel mills, both locally and overseas, have been inundated with so much scrap over the last 4 months that they have so much supply, they can't catch up. And the demand, while it's there, they are able to fulfill a lot of their orders. And what we have found is that when scrap steel mills have too much supply, they artificially depress the prices in the market, even if the supply and demand is there in full swing, because they can only take so much material at a time. With just a few major players in the scrap steel smelting markets in the United States, and with some real major ones spread throughout the world, they don't work in a monopolistic sense, but they will kind of talk to each other to see where supplies are, maybe not directly, but through brokers. Brokers for scrapyards work with all types of steel mills, where they might send busheling to one area, number 1 prepared to another, light iron to a really big shredding operation. So these brokers get a much better feel on a day-to-day trading base on what markets are accepting what materials, and that helps dictate a lot of the scrap prices. So don't be upset that the steel prices are down. Just be happy that we've still seen a very stable market, but it looks like we have another question to answer.
Michael from Florida asked, I have a bag of aluminum caps. Is that still considered steel?
No, those aluminum caps off of the soda cans are not considered steel. And one place that we've seen a lot of these tabs come from, I believe they're called aluminum tabs generally, are from charitable events that happen at local school districts where people pop them off. Somehow they're able to make money from some manufacturers in the can industry, and they're able to kind of cash those in. But then when you bring them to scrap yards, the question is, do you buy them as aluminum cans, or do they buy them as regular sheet? One thing you shouldn't do, unless they are actually steel, don't put them in your steel. You probably could sell them as a sheet aluminum at your local yard, knowing that there's not a lot of weight, but at least it gives you a way to make more money instead of throwing it into the steel piles. Now, things that we've really been watching, insulated copper wire markets have been super interesting to me. I've been watching these closely and really gauging what levels of recovery overseas buyers are taking. As we've spoken over the last few weeks, whether it's through our podcasts or through some of our weekly reports, that for about a 2-year period of time, the Chinese stopped buying low-grade material, and that macro picture was really blurry as the micro solutions were still being put into place. What does that mean? Well, the Chinese just had a hard stop and said, as of this day, we're no longer buying low-grade copper-bearing material. Well, that really gave the world a bit of a shot in the arm, because now, what do you do with computer cords, Cat5, Cat6, and lower-grade wire recoveries? That forced other other recycling operations to open themselves up to new opportunities, buying these low-grade materials in places like Malaysia and other Asian countries have started to buy these low-grade materials, increasing the price along with increasing the market, and hopefully we'll be able to see more higher prices for insulated copper wires moving forward. Let's answer another question.
Why is it that many scrap dealers nationwide classifies Cat 5 and 6 as number 2 insulated, when in fact the conductors are bright bare?
So they are bright bare, and that's an awesome question. I'll ask you a question. Have you ever tried to strip them? If the answer is no, and you want to talk about wire choppers or things like that, I've been to chopping facilities. I see how much work is involved in taking that Cat 5, that Cat 6, pounding it so it's flat, chopping it, having it go through a wire processor, separating the plastic, separating the copper, and then most of the time running it a second time to get that clean, bare chop out. Now, yes, the copper that's inside is going to be a bare bright, but the process that it takes to get to that bare bright generally requires 2 to 3 different runs through the wire choppers, which costs the scrapyards more money, which lowers the price, even though it is a number 1 ICW. On the books, they just put it as a number 2 ICW, by the way, insulated copper wire. And that just makes it where the prices are exactly that. Now let's talk about catalytic converters, where we've seen rrcats.com pushing some really nice prices out there, getting some fantastic online reviews, and having so many different opportunities to buy catalytic converters from you, your friends, your neighbors, and people throughout the country. Now, we've seen the rhodium prices climbing back towards $27,000 per ounce. But let's throw rhodium out for now, and let's talk about 2 different metals that I've been very happy with over the last month: platinum and palladium. Now, Tom, where am I going to find bars of platinum or palladium? Well, you could go online and buy them. That's completely doable. You're probably not going to do that at $2,000 or $3,000 an ounce. So let's talk about the markets as a whole. Over a 30-day running average for both platinum and palladium, not talking about rhodium, they are almost unchanged. What is going on? Stabilization in the markets. Platinum has ranged from $1,140 to $1,200 per ounce over a 30-day period. That's fantastic news. Why is that fantastic news? Because that shows that the market has stabilized. That shows that the market is finding its floor, just like copper is. And the same goes for palladium. Those markets have ranged in the 2250 to 2400 per ounce range. Some of them have climbed, 2400 to 2600 per ounce. Sorry, some of these numbers are in my head I'm pulling out. But what does that show me? 2400 to 2600, while it is a big price difference per ounce, it's in a range that isn't going crazy. Less than 10% movement over a 30-day period, and it's really less than that. I think it's more like 5% right now. Those show me that the floors are being set, and we're almost reestablishing where the baselines are for these different metals. Why is this so important to catalytic converters? Because as we have seen a price explosion for catalytic converters told to us by rrcats.com, we've been monitoring where the markets are, and with rhodium being the only wild card with prices ranging 25 to 30% over the last 30 days, pretty much the whole market has been in really good shape. It looks like we have another question. Great, let's answer it.
How come scrapyards put yellow and red brass together, calling it yellow?
Well, if they're going to do the work for you or for themselves, then they're going to buy it as mixed metal. And red brass, to be bought as a red brass, a clean red brass or a clean bronze, it has to be clean. What does that mean? No plastic, no steel, no gaskets inside. Sometimes the ball that's in the middle of some large valves is yellow brass, where you scratch the outside, but from experience and history, the scrapyard knows that the inside ball is made of yellow brass. So when they're buying things, would you rather they buy them really mixed or as a yellow brass? Yes, they're going to spend time upgrading their material and selling it as a red brass, but that's why iScrap exists, to help give you these tools, help give you this advice so you can learn how to make more money with your yellow or red brass and to separate it differently. We have a follow-up question.
What would window frames go as? Aluminum extrusion?
So we've talked about aluminum extrusion before, and window frames are almost 50% of the questions that we get when we talk about aluminum extrusion. I can't say this loud enough, and I'm not going to yell. Aluminum extrusion is not a grade of scrap. It is a process. Aluminum extrusion is not a grade of scrap. It is a process. It's just like making cookies. You put dough into a cookie maker or whatever the cookie press is, and you press those cookies out. That's the extrusion process. You're extruding a cookie through a cookie press. Aluminum gets extruded through a mold. Ask your scrapyard what grade your windows are, and then you'll have your category. Is it a painted clip? Is it a painted 6061? Is it bare 6063? Is it painted 6063? Is it a bare 6063 with a caulking or a rubber mold on it? If there is, that almost always makes it into an aluminum sheet. You need to ask your scrapyards better, more educated questions so you can learn about pricing in a more efficient and quicker way. That is why and what we're doing here at iScrap, helping to teach you about the markets, helping to show you how to make more money with your scrap by following our podcasts, by receiving our push notifications, by becoming a Patreon supporter, learning more about the markets and articles that we read about all over the world. Don't forget, commodities are a world traded asset. They are not United States based or Canadian based. They are all world traded. So with our iScrap 2.0 coming out in the coming months, we have been working on getting more prices pushed to you, more news pushed out there, and creating a more clean platform for you to be able to not only report prices that you receive, but also view more prices that other people are receiving, which are going to help put together those scrap national price averages that we post every single day. Now, scrappers, whether you're selling your cats to rrcat.com, giving us questions, or sharing stories with us through our social media pages, we appreciate and love hearing about these things. Don't forget, every Wednesday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we go live on Facebook and YouTube answering your scrap questions. If you watch this after it's recorded, ask the questions anyway. Our team is constantly monitoring this so we can get you the scrap answers, scrap price ranges, and learn more about what you're doing. We have one more question that we're going to squeeze in here, and then we will be going to our regularly scheduled program, which is buying scrap. Shoot.
Do all the strings from copper motors have to be taken out? Some are very hard to take out.
So, I mean, if you want to make more money with your copper motors, you can take more of them out. The ones that are stuck, they don't have to be taken out, but your scrapyard certainly isn't going to pay you more money if there's some copper residue on the steel. So think about it. The more work that you do, the more money that you make. If it's too hard for you to take it out, just leave it there. I mean, I've said it for years. Who's better than you? Nobody. So what's your time worth if you're sitting there beating a hammer against a piece of an electric motor to pull out half a pound of copper? That's worth $1.50. Is that worth 10 minutes, 20, 30 minutes of your time, your frustration, your moaning, your groaning, your black and blue thumb that you hit with the hammer when you were trying to get upset at the copper? No. If you can't pull it out easily and you can't use the forums through our Facebook pages or the questions through our different videos and blogs that we've written about, ask your fellow scrappers. They might have a tip for you. That's why we are bringing scrappers together to help not only you make more money, but to help them make more money. Until next week, scrappers, I'll scrap you later.